I call and remind the city secretary.
Commitment to enhancing education opportunities for medical and graduate students, primary care and specialty physicians, biomedical scientists, and allied health professionals, and with advancements to improve patient health care and disease prevention.
Welcome to Focus on Abilities, a program about issues affecting the lives of people with disabilities. I'm your host, Lex Frieden, and today we have a very special edition of Focus on Abilities. We're on location in the home of Justin Dart Jr. in Washington, D.C., and we're going to talk a lot about the history of the disability movement in the United States with Mr. Dart. Justin, welcome to Focus on Abilities.
Yeah, it's a privilege to be here with you, Lex.
Justin, you are the only person that I've ever known who has received the Medal of Freedom, the highest award that the United States can give an individual. When you received that award from President Clinton, what went through your mind? Did you have a sense of why you had actually been given that award?
Oh yes, I think we all know that, because our movement, our infant movement, has been gaining momentum now, and power and wisdom and political savvy now rapidly for a number of years. And you know, you took the lead to pass the ADA, the first Civil Rights Act for people with disabilities in the history of the world. And I think they finally realized that they had to do something to recognize our movement. And they had to pick somebody to symbolize all the thousands of people that did all this stuff. So I guess I was the oldest one and the biggest contributor to the party and so forth. And so they picked me to symbolize what you and a hell of a lot of other people have done. I think that's exactly why they did it, and it will be followed by more, I'm sure.
Now, Justin, you have often recognized yourself not as a leader, but as a member of a movement. And I just, you know, I'd like for you to characterize your role in your own words. I mean, do you see yourself more as a symbol, a person who just happened to be at the right place at the right time, or do you see yourself as a leader or a visionary? People have described you in all those terms.
Well, I'm a person who has played a role, and you might call it a leader's role, but what it really is more of a symbolic role. Some people, you know, like Bob Kafka, they're out doing civil disobedience and changing the world every day. And I have played a role as a writer and a politician, a lobbyist at the higher levels of politics, and also a person who has tried to go out and listen to the grassroots. You know, I've been to every state at least 5 times, listening to, you've been on some of those trips, listening to people. And so I've been visible, but I don't take any particular, I don't think that conveys any particular virtue. It's just like you have a quarterback on the team is more visible than the offensive guard. Well, that doesn't mean he's as good as the offensive guard.
That may be true, but
it's just automatically visible because of the role that he happens to play.
But the fact is, you have done an exceedingly fine job of being a symbolic leader and a leader, and people adore you. I mean, when you go to speak to groups, they cheer, they chant, they get teary-eyed. People love you, and I realize that that's mutual. But by the same token, leaders come and leaders go, and someday there'll be a need for a new leader, a new symbol in the disability movement. And what would you say to a young person today who aspired to be Justin Dart in the year 2050? What is it that made you the leader that you are?
First thing I'd say to him is I hope to God you don't aspire to be Justin Dart, because, or even Lex Frieden, because let's face it, we have not solved all the problems in the world, and they got to do better than us. And I hope that they will try and learn something from our experience, but I hope to God they do better than we did. And one thing we have to do is to break through into the media. We haven't had a Martin Luther King or a Mandela or a Bill Clinton or in our movement, and you can't win these days without being very strong in the media. That's one weakness, and of course we got to get out. And I think we got the greatest movement that ever was. I'm proud of the quality of our leadership, and I'm talking about you, and I'm talking about a lot of Paul Marchand and Bob Kafka and Ed Roberts and Elizabeth Boggs and lots of other people. There just aren't enough of us yet. We need to put a couple of zeros behind the numbers of our leaders. We don't.
But how do we do that? Do we train people? Do we beg people to join us in our mission? Do we?
I think we got to get out, and I believe in direct method. Get out and train people, and have the courage to give them responsibility. One good thing we did recently is to sponsor and support Jonathan Young to go in the White House, and he's a very young man, very energetic, and now we got to resist trying to tell him what to do and let him use that power.
So in some respects, it's our role to find opportunities for younger people and to promote them in those roles and to support them once they get in those roles.
Empower them and then let them get better than we are.
Now, this concept of empowerment is one that's popular in rhetorical circles today, but it's one that's very meaningful to you. You're the first person I ever heard use the phrase empowerment. Now all the politicians talk about it, but you talked about it years ago. What exactly does empowerment mean to you?
Empowerment means to me something very specific, and that is that I think the first priority of each human being, the first priority of each family, the first priority of each community, each nation, and of humanity as a whole, is to empower each and every one of its members, whether it's one member, me, or whether it's the family, or whether it's the whole society, to fulfill their potential for self-government, for government, if you believe in democracy, and I do, for being fully productive, to produce a life of quality, to live a life of maximum quality, and to produce a life of quality for every other person on earth, because I believe that humanity is inherently interdependent. But I'm serious about empowerment. I'm not saying the kind of empowerment that you hear from the politicians, vote for me and I'll make your life beautiful. I want those people to make the decisions. Every single person. And that's the only way democracy or science is going to work.
Now, when you talk about empowerment, you're talking about empowerment for all people, not just people with disabilities, and you've applied that very effectively to your work in the disability community.
And I'm talking about something that we've learned about in disability, customized empowerment. We empower people one at a time, not by groups, not by big laws where you got to fit into these one formula fixes everything categories, and half the people fall through the cracks. I'm talking about what somebody tried to do for you and me in a kind of a crude way, maybe, is they look at what we got, to work with, and then they make a custom plan to empower. They started off doing it physically more than politically, but they made a custom plan to empower Lex Frieden and Justin Dart to maximize the abilities that we had after we received significant disabilities. And so we started to experiment with customized empowerment with absolutely explosive results. And one of us became a 4-term president of the United States by using that.
Now, Justin, when you talk about empowerment and you talk about quality of life for people, how do you define a reasonable quality of life? Is that a relative term? Does each person have to define their own quality of life, or is there a standard that we can go by?
I do not think it's entirely relative. It is different. Each person is different, but there are certain things that are not relative. Food, clothing, health care, housing, love, self-determination, creativity. I believe that creativity is almost like an unalienable right and an inherent virtue of human being, and that if it's oppressed, it's almost like taking somebody's food away, you know. I think those things are not relative. You take somebody's food away, it doesn't matter who they are or what their politics are, they're going to die. You take their clothes away, you take their house away, you take their love away.
So is it the society's responsibility to ensure that minimum standard, or is it the
It's the society's responsibility. But who is the society? That's you and me. Society does not exist somewhere off there up in the sky, you see, showering us with things like Social Security and universal health care. When you and I and the rest of the individual folks produce food, then we eat. When we go to the Bahamas and play golf and stop producing food, nobody eats.
So it's also the society's responsibility, yours and mine, to ensure that people can produce on their own behalf and can help others in the process.
Society is responsible for us. That's number two. Number one, we are responsible for society.
Now, Justin, your views on these issues are big picture views. Why did you choose, and I believe this was a conscious choice, why did you choose to commit your life, your energy, your resources, whatever they might be, why did you choose to commit those to the disability movement and not to the larger movement?
Well, that's an interesting question, because my first choice was to commit my energies to the larger movement. And I read Gandhi when I was 19 years old and became an impassioned rebel without a cause, you know, looking for something to support. And so I was into civil rights for African Americans long before I was in the disability movement. And I was in civil rights for migrant workers and even students and women before I was in the disability movement. And that's when I was disabled. And it never occurred to me that my rights were being abused, in which they were much more than they ever are now, because that was back in the 50s. And that just shows how deep those prejudices are rooted in our culture, that I didn't even see myself as having rights. But then when I finally went to Vietnam to investigate people with disabilities there in Vietnam in the war, back in the war, '66, and I saw some real atrocities. It kind of just made you sick. And I just had a meeting with Yoshiko, and I said, this is a cause we got to get into.
So you went to North Vietnam, is that right?
South Vietnam.
South Vietnam in late 60s, and that experience is really what made you commit yourself to the disability rights movement?
Yeah, because I went down there. See, I had gotten in as a businessman to disability, you know, they say employ people with disabilities, it's a good thing to do, and they come on time and support wheelchair sports. And I had started doing all these things, and I had got a lot of good PR from this, and if you want a testimony that it's good business, you got mine. So I went down, I decided to go down to Vietnam and do a study for the Rehabilitation International World Congress, which was in Germany that year, of disabled people in Vietnam. But I went down there as the president of this company that sort of had a policy to help disabled people. And I got down there and saw these little kids starving to death, laying on a concrete floor in their feces and with flies all over them in a so-called institution, you know. And here I was with my professional photographer taking photo ops with these dying kids. And it all of a sudden came on me, Justin, this is evil. And you're playing the leading role in it. You're down here taking photo ops with these kids that aren't any better off than the people in the Nazi concentration camps. And it really hit me very hard, you know. And I'm getting PR off of a Holocaust. I'm going to make money off of a Holocaust. I'm going to make myself famous off of a Holocaust. And I went back to the hotel. I got sick. I got stoned. I got sick for about a week. And I decided that I couldn't live with myself unless I got in this movement. And ever since then we've been. And I resigned from business and went into the disability rights movement.
When did it occur to you that you yourself had been disenfranchised as a result of your disability, or that discrimination was a relevant term to you personally?
I think that came after the experience in Vietnam. And then when I suddenly realized, and I learned a lot of this from you and Judy Heumann, and you know, we came back to America, and I'd been over there in Japan. And I started a lot of wheelchair sports and things like that, but I had no particular consciousness of the independent living movement. Then rather suddenly, when I was ready to receive that information, I had a hell of a lot of good teachers. And you were one of them, you see. And I remember Judy Heumann and Ed Roberts and a lot of others.
Well, and I think your approach to that is instructive to people. When you got interested in something, as I recall, you went to meet people and to visit with people and to find out from the people who were working in these areas what they knew before you began to offer commentary and before you began to project your own opinion. Do you think that's an important aspect of your approach to getting things done that people should model?
Absolutely. You know, Sam Rayburn, when LBJ got elected to Congress, and Sam Rayburn said, "Lyndon, I'm going to give you one piece of advice. Go up there and keep your mouth shut for a year and just listen." And listening is very important in politics or in anything.
Now, why is history important, Justin? You have, as long as I've known you, you have made references to historical figures. You've read books of history. You cite history. History drives a lot of your own views, both towards issues that are current and those that you project onto the future. Why is history important?
Well, I don't think the causes that you and I are fighting for were invented by us, and millions before us has fought in these causes, particularly here in America, in the American Revolution, and our pioneer mothers and fathers, and Abraham Lincoln, and the labor leaders, and the women's rights leaders, and the farm leaders, and the African American community, the Hispanic community, and I think the old saying, if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it, meaning you're doomed to repeat the negative parts of it. And I just believe in learning, just like I did when I wanted to go in the independent living movement. You may remember that the first thing I did is got in the car and went around to the leading 30 independent living centers in the country and interviewed them. I think you gave me that list, and listened to them. Took several months.
But it's also important that after you finished that tour of the independent living centers, you wrote a book, a monograph about what you had learned.
And you published it.
And but the point is, I think, Justin, that when you learn something, you have made a conscious effort every time to share that with others. You write prolifically. You're doing that all the time. Even during the past year when you've been ill, you spent most of your time writing. Is that another characteristic that you would pass on to young people who aspire to be leaders in the future?
Well, some people write. There's many ways to contribute. Writing is only one, and I think that's again, it's just like what is your ability? What's your role on the team? You know, there's lots of different positions play. Some people write, some people speak, some people don't say anything. They just go out and do action, you know, and like some members of ADAP, you know what I mean? And it's all valuable. And I wouldn't necessarily say that everybody should be a writer.
Can you characterize the most important driving philosophy that's in your life now?
Well, it's the empowerment thing. I think empowerment is the next revolution. You know, Thomas Jefferson said that we ought to have a revolution. What was it, every 20 or 30 years? Or I forgot, you probably know. And I think that through the present methods of democracy and science and free enterprise, we have achieved what is obviously the richest, most democratic culture in the history of the world. But I think now we're reaching sort of limits of the old model in the same way that the DC-3 was said to be the best airplane ever made at its time, but it reached certain limits which were which were characteristics of its success mostly, but it couldn't hold all the people that wanted to fly in it. So now we have a 747. I think that the empowerment, instead of processing democracy as democracy for groups, when we empower on a custom basis each individual person to live their full potential, I think that will be the next step in democracy. And you say, well, that sounds a little socialistic. No, this is a very tricky concept, because part of empowerment is dismantling a lot of the paternalistic hierarchy of government and empowering the individual to do those things directly, and giving individuals more choices. And some ideas are pretty radical.
Can that be done in a peaceful, constructive process?
Well, I think it can. Whether we're going to do it or not is another thing, because it would result in a lot of very profound change. For example, if you were empowered and I was empowered to choose our own education, as I envision it, and we could choose through the internet, the computer, to take this course from Harvard or that one produced by IBM or produced by your institute in Texas, and that would cause an entire reorganization of the public school system. A lot of teachers would have to become other things. And so I got some pretty strong ideas about empowerment. Literally means passing decisions to people.
And Justin, you're writing a book called You Have Power. And if you want to share that with folks, we're going to conclude this interview, but it's been a real honor and a privilege for me to have this opportunity here today. Thank you for sharing yourself and your ideas, and thank you for the role that you've played in the disability movement.
Well, Lex, I want to thank you. You've been my mentor and my sponsor, and all these years, and you're one of my heroes.
Well, I thank you. I want to thank Justin Dart for being our guest on Focus on Abilities today, but I want to thank all of you for watching. This has been a special edition of Focus on Abilities from Washington, D.C. I'm Lex Frieden. Please join us next time. Thank you.